Welcome back. You're watching Political Exchange. My guest tonight, of course, Castro Guvadia. He's the MD of the Banking Association. And we're talking financing of the NDP and, of course, the massive infrastructure rollout program. Now, Cas, apart from the infrastructure issue, you've identified four in total areas that you want to commit on. Let's work our way down the list. Let's talk about human settlements and spatial development. And it's an area that you have and a space that you have been playing in. Now, we know, of course, that many people are talking about this gap market that is coming up. And if you look at South Africa's civil service, many of our people, and given the fact that the state is such a large employer, many of the people who fall into that gap market find themselves at the lower spectrum of our civil service. I spoke to a couple of people involved in financing, and people said this is a very lucrative market and there is financial return. From the Banking Association's point of view, is this just hype? Is people who are generally risk averse prepared to go into the gap market?
No, look, the biggest problem in the gap market is the lack of affordability. I mean, the bottom line is that these are people, and many civil servants, who fall outside of the subsidy scheme, but cannot afford private sector mortgage finance, and construction cost is high. People have had severe demands on their income, and people just aren't, first-time home buyers just aren't able to afford homes anymore. So, what do you do about it? I mean, the R1 billion mortgage default insurance that the government is talking about, we've done a calculation. If you apply that to the entire sort of gap market demand, it makes a difference of R100 a month on your affordability.
Which is not much.
Which is not much, okay? So we need to look for other solutions. I think one possible solution is to actually begin to promote and popularize rental housing.
Yes, but now let's get there. I mean, in the old apartheid days, we had municipalities involved in rental stock. I mean, I grew up in a place where, in Cape Town, where the rent was the order of the day. And then, of course, the idea moved that what you need is ownership of homes. And once you give people a stake in owning their home, there's a broader buy-in into society. And, we got all caught up with this idea of creating this middle class. And of course, the middle class is under severe pressure in the current global situation. Is the idea of rental stock becoming attractive again for investors?
I think it is becoming attractive. I mean, one of my positions is I'm on the board of the Trust for Urban Housing Finance. I mean, we now have a book in the inner city of close on to R1.5 billion, all rental housing stock. Okay, we funded emerging landlords, we funded other landlords to convert buildings and into residential and rent them. So I think there is a demand for rental housing. I think to a certain extent, it was also, call it for want of a better word, a cultural issue. As you said, we had to own a property. But today, particularly young up-and-coming professionals are more mobile. They don't.
And your first property, you don't necessarily want to own.
So they don't stay in jobs forever. They
move around.
They move around. They want lock up and go places because they're active socially and so on. So I think we need to begin to generate that. We need to begin to market that, and we need to begin to talk about that. We need to look at alternative building material. We're working with valuers at the moment and doing workshops with the valuers to see if we can bring alternative ways of building into the market so that valuers can actually value that and mortgages can be given over that. We obviously, I think government does want to look at mortgage default insurance, and we're working with government on that. But at the moment where they are at is that they want to look at this for the whole market, and we're saying rather limited to the gap market. So I think there are a whole range, and then obviously the spatial planning stuff. We need to crack this thing about people having to travel.
But why are we not cracking it? I mean, if you look at all the new developments, there are two things that it falls down on is still geography. I mean, people, if you look at what people spend their salaries on, it's food and, of course, transport. And then, of course, the other thing is that the racial demographics are not changing. I mean, COSATU recently released a report saying that the old apartheid spatial planning is still underpinning the way in which we approach housing. Certainly, Cass, 20 years or close to 20 years into democracy is simply not on.
Well, I think one of the problems is, the one is the public transport system. The second is that even, you know, in the inner city, in the last few years, property prices have shot up.
Absolutely, yes.
And what we should be looking at is, if government is, there are instances where municipalities actually expropriate buildings that have been occupied and so on. Let's see how we put those buildings to good use. Municipalities should be putting those, making those available to developers for nothing. Let the developers invest money, reduce the rentals. There's plenty of land owned by municipalities and other government departments in vicinities close to inner cities. That land should be made available. You know, so again, I think that it's a conversation we need to have, to say that, okay, where are these pockets of land? Who owns them? If they're private sector owned and not being used, can we incentivize them coming into the market? But you know, it's a conversation that we just don't have, and you know, municipalities have their own capacity issues and so on. And one of the points I made at the summit is that every time I talk to municipalities or government departments that complain about capacity, I get asked for money, and my view is that throwing money at systems that don't work doesn't make sense.
Yes.
But ask me to approach my members to second capacity, to second expertise, then they'd be more than willing to do it. So again, it's, you know, what sort of conversations are we having? And I think there needs to be a receptivity in government to accept that sort of expertise. We don't want to
well, the interesting thing, of course, Cass, is that when you do speak with government, they say exactly what you're saying, and they want to work with retired accountants and CFOs and you know, CAs and so on. But it remains a talk. I mean, we can have an entire program on this, but let's move on to the other two issues that were identified by the summit. Support, of course, for SMMEs and you know, the whole question of venture capital. I spoke with the African Development Bank recently about the kind of gap between your DFIs on the one hand, your financial institutions on the other hand, and the fact that the commercial imperatives of the one, the developmental imperatives of the other, often mean that people still fall through the cracks and there's a difficulty in getting capital. And he was saying venture capitalists is in fact where we should be looking. You share that view. I see you shaking your head.
I share that view. I mean, no business can survive on debt capital alone. And this is my constant refrain every time we talk SMEs.
But we have no appetite for venture capital in South Africa.
So again, I mean, we certainly beginning to talk to the Venture Capital Association, saying, why is that not happening? No. We need some sort of angel capital. We need capital that's going to slowly walk with SMEs and expect a return in the long term. And with that, they need debt finance, and we need to structure a package of finance that actually makes sense for the business to survive in the long term. Also, I think that you know, there's a mismatch in the discussion between private finance and some of the development finance institutions. You know, we had a memorandum of understanding with Kula. We started working on that. We were looking at a credit bureau for SMEs. Then suddenly Kula got swallowed up into IDC. There were turf battles. Now economic development has taken up the credit bureau stuff. We don't know where it is, and so on. So you know, again, CIFA needs to come to the party. We need to see, okay, CIFA, are you appropriately structured to provide non-financial support? Do you need assistance to do that? What role can banks play in that? And so instead of sending an entrepreneur to the bank for finance and then the bank saying, sorry, we need you to do this, and they go separately to CIFA, why can't we sit on the table? I mean, there was a while ago, even in housing, where we made a suggestion to provincial government. Let's have a desk in every banking hall in the province where we process the subsidies. Because what used to happen was people used to go to the province, showing that they earn less, so
Yes,
that they get
yes.
more subsidy.
Yeah.
And to the bank showing they earn more, they get a bigger bond. And they were arbitraging. This we said we can process it, there, no arbitrage. Electronically, you decide who gets the subsidy. And just never taken up.
I'm sorry to cut in here, Cass, but just finally, the question, of course, of financial inclusion, least on my list here, but certainly not least important. It is very crucial to bring the unbanked in. Our track record in some instances have been patchy.
Yeah. Again, something that I mentioned at the summit. Again, we need to change the discussion. My view is that we need a more diversified financial sector. Banks, the way they are structured, the way they are regulated, aren't going to be in every part of the country, okay? But we've got the Cooperative Banks Act. We work with the Cooperative Banks Development Agency. Let's try to get more cooperative banks on stream. There can be then partnerships between banks and those to deliver financial services. Let's look at other community-based organizations. How do we enable them to administer themselves properly, regulate them to facilitate them so that it gives banks confidence to interact with them. And I think we need a range of financial institutions that understand different markets, that know how to work in those markets, and that are structured to be sustainable in those markets. And then banks and others can actually work with those. Having said that, banks are doing mobile banking. One bank is opening something like 17,000, 18,000 accounts a month on mobile banking at the moment. They're using Spaza shops as agents, and there's a whole lot of stuff happening.
So I suppose there's innovation or space for innovation everywhere. Cass, the next time I'm having you on Political Exchange, I'm having government here, so you guys can slug it out. I'll be the referee.
Great.
Thank you so much for that. That, of course, the end of our show tonight. Join me again tomorrow night for another edition of Political Exchange. I'm Karima Brown. Goodbye.